Did you know that French cinema has a mother? And that she wasn't just a filmmaker, but a compassionate, curious, one-of-a-kind artist who cared for her films like they were her own children. Before Godard, before Truffaut, before the French New Wave even had a name, one woman was already paving the way forward for the French film industry, Agnès Varda.
Because in front of a camera, people behave differently. That's what documentary is so exciting to make, because in front of a camera, something comes out of people. And if you can catch that, it's very exciting.
She was born in 1928 as Arlette Varda in Brussels, the third of 5 children. Her father was a Greek refugee and her mother was from the southern French coastal town of Sète. So from birth, she was already part of 2 very different cultures, a shifting identity that was so common in her work. When World War II erupted, her family fled Belgium, escaping the German invasion and traveling south to Sète, her mother's hometown. This displacement and sense of being in between would follow her for the rest of her life and became an important emotional core for her films. She held within her this innate understanding that every person and every face carried a story of survival and resilience. In Sète, during the war years, the Varda family lived on the edge of town on a boat docked in the harbor. This wasn't a glamorous yacht either, and the family even wore life jackets in their day-to-day so as to make sure no one would fall over the side and drown. This young girl, running from war, living at the edge of town in her tiny floating house, would observe life from a distance, unknowingly beginning to internalize these psychological motifs. After the war ended, the Varda family finally left the boat and settled into a more stable life. Arlette Varda finished high school in Montpellier and then moved to post-war Paris on her own when she was just 18 in 1946. This was also when she chose to change her name to Agnes, one part to honor her father's Greek heritage and another part a conscious act of self-definition. The name Agnes, meaning holy or pure in Greek, felt much stronger and less diminutive to her as she was determined to leave that shy, timid girl on the boat and reinvent herself as an artist determined to create and express.
Spray kind of affection and love to whoever I film. That's the point for me. And then something comes out of that because they feel that you fill them with, you care, you wish them to be good.
In the late 1940s, Paris was a post-war city, full of energy and rebuilding. Varda immersed herself in this new opportunistic city, enrolling at the Sorbonne, where she studied literature and psychology, trying to understand people and the structure of the human mind. Later, she shifted to art history at the École du Louvre, studying painting, architecture, and cultural heritage before finally enrolling at the Vaugirard School of Photography, one of the oldest and most prestigious photography schools in France. Clearly, Varda had a deep love of art, which is why it's so interesting that despite Paris being the capital of French cinema, she didn't really watch movies. This meant she never absorbed the rules and also never learned the cliches.
I was a photographer for a while, and I don't know how I switched to cinema, because I didn't go to film school. I hardly saw 10 films until 25 years old. But I came to cinema inspired by painting and literature.
Instead, Varda spent her time taking photos with her medium format Rolleiflex camera, a gift her mother had given her in support of her artistic passion. As her proficiency with her camera grew, she began to get paid work photographing weddings, birthday parties, and portraits before being hired by mentor and visionary theater director Jean Villard to photograph his founding festival, Festival d'Avignon, a festival dedicated to spreading art and creativity and the oldest arts festival in France that is still celebrated to this day. When Villard took over the Théâtre National Populaire, or TNP, in Paris in 1951, he hired Varda as the troupe's official photographer when she was only 23. She would shoot for the TNP for the next decade, honing her understanding of composition, lighting, and staging, while capturing images of great French actors such as Gérard Philippe and Jean Moreau. Varda often restaged scenes just to get the image right, essentially developing the skill of directing while still calling it photography.
J'ai été photographe dans ma première vie. Des photographies de Gérard Philippe et de Jean Villard au Festival d'Avignon et au TNP. On m'en parle encore.
Then, in the summer of 1953, Varda returned to sets with her Rolleiflex camera. She began taking hundreds of photos, fishermen untangling nets, Children in doorways, old women gossiping in the street. It was visual anthropology, poetic, curious, and observant. But something was missing. Varda was determined to make these images move. Varda began writing a script, not in screenplay format, just in prose. She imagined a story of a disintegrating Parisian couple visiting sets, layered over the daily life of the fishing village. With no formal film training and instead a deep understanding of photography, she asked friends from the TNP to act as crew and casted 2 actors for the lead roles of the couple. She shot the film in about 2 weeks and edited it herself in her apartment by hand with the help of friend and collaborator Alain Resnais, who also would go on to make the French New Wave gem and one of my favorites, Hiroshima Mon Amour. In total, the film cost about 1.5 million francs, or about 14,000 USD at the time. Low budget, even by today's standards. The film itself was totally radical in structure, in which 2 different sides come together to make a whole expression. One side being the stylized, staged drama of a couple's relationship unraveling, and the other side a raw, unfiltered account of the everyday struggles and joys of a French fishing town. When La Pointe Courte premiered in 1955, it didn't make headlines. No distributor, no Cannes debut, barely a whisper in the press. Critics weren't sure what to make of it. Part fiction, part documentary, fully unclassifiable. Some saw poetry, others saw confusion. But in the crowd sat 2 young men, Francois Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard. Not icons yet, just cinephiles looking for something new. And in Varda's quiet, self-made film, they saw it. A story shot on location, untrained actors besides professionals, a director's uninhibited vision. No studio, no rules, just instinct, texture, and truth. It was bold, personal, form-breaking, everything the French New Wave would become. 4 years before it even had a name. Now if you're wondering what exactly the French New Wave is and why it's so important, essentially it was a cinematic pivot where a group of young film critics and cinephiles in late 1950s France rejected the polished, studio-made cinema of quality, as they called it, and instead opted to shoot in the streets, using handheld cameras and tell personal stories that created a more authentic film grounded in realism.
Late 50s, early 60s, I think it's continually inspiring to filmmakers and film lovers. To me, it represents freedom and personal expression. You could say it's the prototype of indie filmmaking. You have a big film community, everyone's writing about film, talking about film. These people are friends. And within that comes these cahiers du cinema critics making their first films, you know, Truffaut, Chabrol, Godard. But at that moment, they were all in it together. They don't have any money, so they don't have cranes, they don't have dollies. And what was revolutionary for them, and you can just feel kind of the exuberance of it, you can kind of make a whole film with a little camera and a couple friends. That's always the message.
Agnès Varda, though often grouped with them, was different. She's considered part of the left bank, a parallel movement made up of slightly older, more experimental artists. Unlike the New Wave's rebellious youth, the left bank was introspective, poetic, and deeply tied to other art forms like literature, photography, and politics. Regardless of classification, the movies of both groups made during this time would deeply influence other filmmakers such as Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, Quentin Tarantino, and many more.
Godard was so influential to me at the beginning of my aesthetic as a director, of like wanting to be a director. His kind of like lack of complete any type of film style, just this wanting to make movies for love of it. Godard is the one who taught me the fun and the freedom and the joy of breaking rules.
Varda's film, although revolutionary at the time, was perhaps still too early for the industry, as it did not gain her a lot of money or studio support, especially as a woman director working outside of traditional industry practices. So to keep her skills sharp, she made some short films but largely worked in photography, even traveling to China in 1957, where she documented daily life under Mao. It was one of the first Western photo reports from inside communist China, and it sharpened her eye for observing real people quietly and honestly.
Loving to look at people and get the right moment, you know, do something. But being a photographer, teaches you to go to see people, meet places, find ideas about how to put people in their own surrounding or taking them out.
Then, by the early 1960s, the landscape had shifted with the rise of the French New Wave. Producer Georges de Beauregard, famous for bankrolling Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, was actively looking for fresh art house filmmakers to add to his roster. Varda's opportunity came through her personal connection to director Jacques Demy, whom she would marry in 1962. After Beauregard asked his New Wave protégés if they knew of any talent, Demy recommended Agnès Varda as a worthy filmmaker with a unique vision. And so, in 1962, Cleo From 5 to 7 was released.
Minute, beau papillon. Être laide, c'est ça la mort. Tant que je suis belle, je suis vivante et 10 fois plus que les autres.
Cleo unfolds in real time, 90 minutes in the life of a woman awaiting the results of a cancer test. The idea of a film matching the real-world duration of its story, minute by minute, was highly unusual at the time. Varda says she wanted viewers to feel the weight of waiting and the anxiety of our protagonist, a bold and groundbreaking formal choice. Shot entirely on location in Paris, with handheld cameras and natural light, Cleo feels intimate and immediate, clearly drawn from inspiration of Varda's love of documentation and observance. The camera is a distant observer taking notes of Cleo, her expressions, but also the expressions of 1960s Paris. Every frame breathes with the city, the movements of the moment mixed with the beauty of Paris and the fear of what's coming next. Although it wasn't her goal, the result was revolutionary, and today is considered a cornerstone of feminist cinema. It offered a woman's gaze in a movement led by men, and proved that personal cinema could also be political. In Varda's own words, the first feminist gesture is to say, okay, they're looking at me, but I'm looking at them. The act of deciding to look, of deciding that the world is not defined by how people see me, but how I see them.
At that time, I was the only woman. Not that there were not other women directors, it's that I was the only woman for a new cinema, for what I call Cinécriture, a cinema in which find a language typically for the new spirit of what cinema could do, how we could build.
Varda describes her cinematic process as Cinécriture, meaning that when she creates a film, she makes deliberate choices for all elements of production, such as camera, scripting, lighting, and publicity. Because filmmaking is a combination of many moving parts, and each choice needs to be authentic to her singular vision. The third of Varda's films I want to talk about comes 2 decades after releasing Cleo, and is another unique viewpoint of a woman's place in the world, and that is Vagabond, released in 1985, starring the very talented Sandrine Bonnaire. It's a brutal, poetic portrait of a young drifter named Mona, found dead in a ditch, and instead of occurring in real time, Varda chose to unravel time. Through interviews, flashbacks, and fragmented memories, she pieces together Mona's final winter. Not to explain her motives to us, but instead to show us the lack of explanation and the defiant freedom at the heart of her character. Gone is the vibrant Paris, and in its place, the cold, hard road, leaving Varda's signature touch of observing those on the fringe, employing non-actors in interviews, and a documentary-like lens as we observe our protagonist exist outside of society's rules. And most importantly, a woman's gaze at the very core of the film. Not objectifying, not romanticizing, just witnessing. Vagabond is a haunting and profound look into what it means to truly be free.
Pas de désir, pas d'envie. On a essayé de lui proposer des choses, rien. Rien envie de faire. Cette tolérance, c'est l'erreur. Elle est inutile, et en prouvant qu'elle est inutile, elle fait le jeu d'un système qu'elle refuse.
The final film I want to touch on is one that comes almost 50 years after her first feature. Agnès Varda, now in her 70s, but still holding on to her signature curiosity, used the advent of digital cameras to her advantage and created The Gleaners and I in the year 2000. The Gleaners and I is a film about what's left behind and the people who salvage it. It's about repurposing, reimagining, and finding meaning in the overlooked. All of Varda's signature quirks are on full display here. She wanders with a tiny digital camera, playfully and empathetically observing those on the margins, in fields, in markets, outside back doors and broken fences. A journey not just to understand the Gleaners, but to understand herself. Because as she films these outsiders, she's also confronting her own aging. Her hands, her hair, her time passing. To me, she feels like a kid trapped in an old lady's body, still curious, still mischievous, still hungry for play and adventure. And she even proves this in a shot where she forgot to stop recording, letting the lens cap flap wildly in front of the camera. Something that most filmmakers would throw away, she treats like a gift and keeps it in the final movie. And if you've ever doubted how much Varda loves filmmaking, just listen to this.
Ouais, y a des matelas sur les pavés, récup de rue, rap de récup, des belles machines à bien laver, des frigidaires endommagés, des canapés très fatigués, t'as qu'à te baisser pour te meubler. Ouais, des gazinières et des coussins, des fauteuils club, des fauteuils bien, des vieux sommiers tout déglingués, des canapés flétris, fripés, des chaises en bois, des pneus tout plats.
Yes, that is 70-year-old Agnès Varda rapping over her own movie, proving that no matter the age, we can choose to look at life with curiosity, humor, and empathy. For all her playfulness, Agnès Varda was never afraid to take a stand. Behind the candy-colored hair and gentle voice was a woman who fought fiercely for justice. In 1968, she flew from France to Oakland with a camera in hand and spent days filming the Black Panthers during Huey P. Newton's imprisonment. While mainstream media portrayed the Panthers as dangerous, Varda showed something different. A community rallying, feeding children, organizing, and educating. She was able to capture the movement from inside with intimacy, respect, and political clarity. A few years later, she turned her activism inward, signing the famous manifesto of the 343, a public confession from women who had undergone illegal abortions in France, a revolutionary act that helped push the country toward reproductive rights. Varda later recreated this moment in her films because for her, art and activism were never separate. Cinema was a tool to uplift, expose, and defend.
I'm not interested as being a woman director. I'm interested in making a radical film. My aim was to make a film different. I remain on the side of the workers, on the side of the women. And as you know, I'm a joyful feminist. I do my best with what I can do in my films.
But Varda's life also had its delightful, unexpected threads, like her friendship with Harrison Ford, whom she met when he was still a young carpenter in Los Angeles. Long before the fedora and the Millennium Falcon, she tried to cast him in a film for her husband, Jacques Demy, but was denied by the studio, who wanted a more established actor, further proving the fact that Varda has always had a cinematic eye, or the fact that she was one of about 4 people who attended Jim Morrison's small private burial in Paris in 1971. They had met and became friends in 1960s Los Angeles, and Morrison even had a short cameo in one of her films. Just goes to show what a friendly soul she was and how much she loved other artists. And it was this love of art and humanity, people, faces, objects, textures, the poetry of the everyday that eventually led her beyond cinema and into the world of installation art. She built huts out of 16mm film strips, created rooms full of potatoes, sand, mirrors, cats, and memories. At an age when most artists slowed down, Varda sped up, reinventing herself with the same wide-eyed curiosity she had at 20.
Everybody is so full of mystery, so full of beauty, so full of tenderness hidden behind, sometimes, bad gesture, bad words. I'm intrigued by people, and I love them, to be honest, I love them.
In 2017, she became the first female director to receive an honorary Oscar, and that same year she also became the oldest person ever nominated for a competitive Oscar for her film Faces Places at the age of 89. She felt too tired to travel, and in a stroke of humor and creativity, sent a cardboard cutout in her place, which became the star of the evening. Agnès Varda has left an indelible mark on cinema, leaving behind a legacy of empathy, curiosity, and innovation. To me, the biggest lessons are that art is everywhere. You just need to approach the world with an understanding and playful mind. That kindness can be a form of rebellion. That filmmaking can be small and personal and still shake the world. That curiosity is a form of love, and that nothing is too ordinary to be seen, held, or cherished.
Be curious and modest when you work. Everybody has to find its own ideas and structure. Everybody has to choose for himself or for herself. I don't give advice, but be courageous, be curious, be patient, what can I say? And be joyful about it. It's beautiful to be a filmmaker.
Varda taught us that a camera doesn't need to be a machine for perfection and accuracy. It's a tool for empathy. She taught us that the world is full of things left behind, and that the real work The beautiful work is to bend down and pick them up.